Well, Michael, Justice Kirby, may I proceed, sir?
Yes, indeed. Go. Let's get this show on the road.
Thank you, sir. This is terrific, an honor and a privilege. Well, dear friends and colleagues, we are absolutely delighted that you're joining us for actually HRNK's first ever virtual program, first ever Zoom program. Apologies for the miniature dachshund in the background. It is what it is. We're all working from home these days. Most of you are familiar with HRNK. This is America's only civil society organization / think tank dedicated exclusively to researching, investigating, and reporting on the North Korean human rights situation. We have held UN consultative status since April 2018. This is an organization that is fully bipartisan or nonpartisan. Please check out our website, take a look at the bios of our board members. It is an extraordinary privilege and an honor to be hosting Justice Michael Kirby today. Of course, all of us with an interest in North Korean human rights know that Justice Kirby has been a luminary and a leader of the North Korean human rights movement. Justice Kirby was, of course, Chief Commissioner of the UN Commission of Inquiry that completed a landmark report submitted to the UN Human Rights Council in February 2014. This is truly the cornerstone of the North Korean human rights movement, of anything that has to do with investigating and documented what was determined to be crimes against humanity and other egregious human rights violations. Justice Kirby is one of the world's brightest legal minds. He was acting Chief Justice of Australia twice. He's a scholar, he's a bright legal mind. He has served as a member of the World Health Organization's Global Commission on AIDS, President of the International Commission of Jurists in Geneva, UN Special Representative for Human Rights in Cambodia, member of the UNESCO International Bioethics Committee, a member of the High Commission for Human Rights Judicial Reference Group, and a member of the UNAIDS Reference Group on HIV and Human Rights, a member of the Eminent Persons Group on the Future of the Commonwealth of Nations, commissioner of the UNDP Global Commission of HIV and the Law. He has served on the Advisory Council of Transparency International, and the list goes on and on and on.
It certainly does. It certainly does.
And we surely miss you, Michael. You have been such a leader and such an inspiration to all of us, researchers, investigators, human rights defenders from the United States, from South Korea, from Japan, from Europe, from all over the world. Welcome, sir. Thank you so much. We have a great program tonight, really well attended. And Michael, let me begin with a question. It's now been more than 6 years since the February 2014 report of the UN COI. Could you please share with us some of the efforts you have undergone since February 2014 to address the North Korean human rights situation, the human rights situation in the DPRK?
Well, one of the dangers in life is if you've held an office that you move on and somebody else moves into those responsibilities, and the person concerned simply can't give up. And that is not a good look. And it's institutionally not correct. When I departed the work of the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea, the mandate passed back to the Special Rapporteur, at that time Marzuki Darusman from Indonesia, who was the Special Rapporteur who suggested setting up the COI. And Then soon after that, Tomas Quintana of Argentina was appointed to take Marzuki's place, and he is still in office, and he is the mandate holder of the United Nations. And accordingly, I have to be very careful. It's important for me to realize myself and for others to realize that I don't hold the United Nations mandate. Mr. Quintana does. He has produced important reports, including one in February of this year, and I respect his work and the work of the field office that was set up in Seoul, in the Republic of Korea. And what have I done? Well, I've gone to endless university conferences, large numbers of international meetings, occasions for scholars, academics to debate. The International Bar Association, which is the biggest association of lawyers in the world, based now in London, had its big annual conference in Seoul in the Republic of Korea a year ago, and that gave an opportunity to be back on the ground in ROK. The Australian ambassador on that occasion, as he had on previous occasions when I was in South Korea, organized sessions, meetings with relevant groups, so-called defectors, escapees, who live in the Republic of Korea, and civil society organizations. So the answer to your question is, I've kept involved, I've kept interested, I get the material, I read what is coming out, including from HRNK, but I have to remember myself and remind others that I don't have the mandate. And that's important to say at the outset of this dialogue this morning. Otherwise, it all gets a bit confusing as to who is speaking for the United Nations, and I cannot now do that. But I can speak as a citizen, as somebody who held the office in the COI, and as somebody who is deeply concerned for the people of North Korea out there in that dark peninsula. They don't know we are having this dialogue because their links to the world are few and confined essentially to the elite. But we know they are there. We know what their suffering is. We are concerned. And as citizens of the wider world, we are meeting to talk about it.
Michael, thank you very much. We have a terrific group of participants. Let me share a personal note with you. This is the first time ever that my mother is watching an HRNK program from Bucharest, Romania. Dr. Scarlatoiu, she's a linguist. My older daughter, student at Mount Holyoke College in Western Massachusetts, is also dialing in. She's watching. Let me encourage, I will keep asking moderators questions, but let me encourage all participants to ask questions. Most of you, perhaps all of you, are aware of how Zoom works. Please raise your hand. If possible, please ask the questions on camera. If you're not comfortable asking questions on camera or turning on your mic for various reasons, please do text me your questions using the chat function in Zoom. And that said, Michael, let me ask you.
Let me just say to your mother that she can be very proud of you, and we all owe a lot to our parents. If we are inculcated as little children, we are dedicated, or we should be, during our lives. And I had a teacher in a public school in Sydney in 1949 who gave me an airmail paper copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and taught us about it. And so what we learn as children remains with us, and she can be very proud, and your family can be very proud, that out of Romania, of all people, of all countries, you have become a champion for human rights in the world. We all share that mission and obligation.
I'm humbled, sir. Thank you so much. I don't know what to say. And not knowing what to say, Michael, thank you. I'm just going to move on to the next question. How do you assess the state of human rights in North Korea post UN COI, post February 2014? What's going on? Are things better? Are things worse?
Well, some things get a lot of publicity, in particular the meetings of President Trump with Kim Jong-un, the supreme leader, and some things don't get any publicity. But unfortunately for North Korea, we now live in a world of Zoom, and we live in a world of satellites, and we live in a world in which it's possible to peer through the hostile barriers into North Korea. North Korea has repeatedly denied the existence of the political detention centers that we described in our report, but you can go into North Korea by satellite imagery or even by Google Earth and find a great deal about what's going on, and those images confirm the testimony that we received during our public hearings. Is there a problem with sound?
Okay,
there...
Michael, the problem is gone. We're fine.
Yes, I've pulled the plug out.
Oh, it's all good now. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Before I proceed,
that last passage was not heard, as I understand it. But all I said was that we now can get into, we can jump the barrier to some extent, and we can see into North Korea through satellites and imagery, and that imagery confirms the testimony of so many of our witnesses in our public hearings as to the existence of the prisons and detention centers which deny human rights to the people of North Korea.
Michael, we're getting questions, and the first question goes to none other than Roberta Cohen, co-chair emeritus of HRNK's board of directors. Roberta, if you're okay with asking the question directly, please go ahead.
I'll put my glasses on so I can see Roberta.
Do you see me?
I can't, as a matter of fact. I can see your name, but it doesn't open up to your image.
Roberta,
anyway,
bottom of the screen, there's an icon that says start video if you would like to be on camera. If you wouldn't like to be on camera, that's also fine. We have the sound.
Well, I don't want to take your time, but I don't see anything like that. It just says Q&A, lower hand, chat, leave. So maybe I'll just speak. I would have liked to have a picture. That'd be fine. But I first want to just say what a reassuring and wonderful to hear Justice Kirby again. That is, I wanted to say that the report, the COI report, was really the most authoritative document on North Korean human rights, and it raised international consciousness. And I see it as the foundation for the future, really, because it's not clear that anything has changed in the North Korean human rights.
Roberta,
I think we've lost.
Oh. Did you hear anything I said?
Yes, yes, we heard
Yeah.
everything that you
Yes.
said up to now.
Up to now. Okay, I'm not sure
Yeah.
when the now is, but in any event, I see the COI report now as the foundation for the future. There are no...
Well, you say that, Roberta, but when I look at the reports of the special rapporteur, it's as if we did not exist. In a sense, I suppose that is because of the great hostility of North Korea to the report of the COI. And no doubt judgments have been made as to what will be beneficial to the ongoing mandate of the United Nations. And perhaps referring to the report of the COI will rub salt into the wound of the revelations that we made. But logically, one would think you would really start from where the COI left it off, because I didn't hear anybody except sometimes DPRK say that the report was not accurate, that it was not up to date, that it did not have a lot of evidence and testimony. And it really, somebody ought to do within the United Nations system a schedule that sets out the essential findings of the COI and what has changed, because it's now 6, it'll shortly be 7 years. 7 is a magical number, and I think it would be time for that to be done. And if it's not done by the UN, it ought to be done by civil society and by distinguished scholars like yourself.
Let me mention that I said that about future, and I agree with what you just recommended. But my concern for the present right now is that there's an absence of international leadership on the subject of human rights in North Korea. And we've seen that in the Human Rights Council last year, you have a resolution, the annual resolution on North Korea, and neither the United States nor South Korea nor Japan co-sponsored this resolution. There's a rather retreat. And what concerns very much about that, without going into the various administrations, is that there seems to be, and this is what I was going to ask you to comment on, a deference to the North Korean position that human rights are a threat to peace, that human rights is a hostile policy, and that such issues shouldn't be raised. And this is a delinking of security and human rights. After all, with the COI report became a very strong linkage of stability, security, and the need also for human rights improvement. And your report was just a brilliant focus on the nature of the regime in North Korea. This deference, I think, is not only visible on the part of governments that are involved in any peace process right now. That's hard to say, a peace process, what's going on in the background. But the whole idea of human rights being integrated into any negotiations, to be mentioned, to be discussed, and how it's seen, that has taken such a downturn and a retreat. And I wondered whether you had any comments on the whole question of international leadership on this subject, how we begin to mobilize that on this deference to the North Korean position on human rights. After all, your report seemed to be a breakthrough at that time. And after that report, you had congressional legislation in the United States, and you had an effort to even make it clear that if there were ever any normalization of relations, that human rights were going to be part of that process. Now it's even scholars I see speak of sort of not mentioning human rights, maybe integrating some of the issues somewhere. And I'm very glad you mentioned the prison camps, because that is almost a subject that nobody wants to touch. That's considered something too impossible. And your report had, on the contrary, brought it to the fore and made it a subject that should be very much up front. So I wonder if you can comment on any of those thoughts.
Yes, well, certainly I think there have been changes since we delivered our report in 2014 that have not been favorable to publicity to the report of the COI. We three, the commissioners of the COI, decided at our first meeting and within half an hour that the antidote to the strategy of non-transparency, which had been followed by DPRK, had to be a strategy of complete transparency. And that's why we undertook our commission of inquiry in a different way from virtually all other commissions of inquiry of the Human Rights Council. We had public hearings. We invited the media. We had a transcript of the public hearings. We had video of the public hearings. The videos were put online. All of this was available in order to ensure that we were accountable, the commissioners, and that citizens of the world could sit there, and if they had the time and the interest, they could listen, and then they could ultimately hear what we concluded and make their own judgments as to whether that was an appropriate and faithful rendition of the evidence and of the conclusions. Now, if you were in North Korea and trying to control the situation, you would naturally try to prevent the world getting access to the information which the COI collected and expressed. If you were in a society where a small family group and an elite around them, largely by processes of violence, but also by processes of propaganda and control. If you lived in that sort of society, you would try to prevent having to be made accountable. Just look at the destruction within the last week of the reconciliation building in Kaesong in North Korea, just across the demilitarized zone. That really was an act of vandalism. The building had been set up by funding from ROK. It was a perfectly usable building. They could have cleared it out and used it for other purposes, but no, they destroyed it. It was a sort of petulant act. It was an act of a regime that is not accountable to rational standards and to rational conduct, and that's how they like to keep it. And unfortunately, this is the problem that we now face. Nobody wants to go to the uncomfortable truth about North Korea. But the uncomfortable truth about North Korea is stated in the report of the Commission of Inquiry. When this dark chapter in human history and of the history of the Korean people is over, the report of the Commission of Inquiry will still be there, and it will record what the people of North Korea went through. Imagine what it would have been like if during the Nazi period, we had all the information that subsequently came out. But the world said, oh no, if we reveal this, it will only upset Hitler, it'll upset Himmler. And, you know, they're really quite nice people when you meet them. That would have been shameful. In a sense, a lot of people in the know did know about the Nazi horrors, but still there wasn't much. People didn't want to believe it. But that's why the Commission of Inquiry brought forward ordinary citizens. They were not five-star generals with their jackets covered with medals and with decorations for working for the party and for the government. They were ordinary people who had taken it in their own hands to escape. And their testimony stands as a rebuke to the international community. If the international community ignores it, it would be just like ignoring what dribbled out and ultimately came in a total avalanche. And it was because the news about the horrors of the crimes against humanity came out in an avalanche in 1944, 1945, and thereafter, that the international community made a promise. That promise was, every country has breaches of human rights. My own country, Australia, has breaches of human rights. We have breached human rights to our Aboriginal people. We have breached human rights to refugees and sent them on to islands and kept them there for very long periods. Every country has breaches of human rights, but some breaches of human rights shock the conscience of humanity. And they were the breaches that were put into a special category by the international community, and that special category were crimes against humanity and genocide and war crimes. And crimes against humanity are crimes which offend human rights to the extent that they shock the conscience of humanity. And I challenge anybody to read the report of the Commission of Inquiry of the United Nations Human Rights Council and not to conclude that some of the evidence and some of the conclusions which we reached and stated do not shock the conscience of humanity. If you're not shocked by the hostage taking, the grabbing of a little schoolgirl on her way home and spiriting her off to take her to North Korea for a reason that has never been fully explained, apparently simply to give idiomatic Japanese. If you're not shocked by that, if you're not shocked by the treatment of women when they are taken back from China and forced to put their baby upside down into a pail of water in order to kill it, if you're not shocked by public executions, which even now are still happening in North Korea, then you are an unshockable person. And that's why the world made a promise. With crimes that reach the standard, the level of crimes against humanity, we promised we would not turn our back. And it's very important that the international community should not turn its back on North Korea. Mr. Trump took an initiative. To be truthful, I thought this is an initiative worth taking. And maybe he will tempt North Korea by golf courses and tourist hotels and other economic advances to take steps away from their current regime. But sadly, that hasn't produced any good, and all it's produced is silence on human rights. And likewise, other countries are remaining silent. Even the Republic of Korea, whose brothers, sisters, uncles, and relatives are all bound up in North Korea in the crimes against humanity, even South Korea is now falling into silence. And what has that delivered? It's delivered the destruction of a perfectly good, rather attractive looking building and the termination of the arrangements which had been set in place for dialogue. So I think we've really just got to face ourselves and face the report. The report is still here. Here's the report. It's not all that long to read it, and it's, if I can say so, well written. It's not a boring report. Most United Nations reports are boring. This is not boring. I took a lot of pains to make it a readable report. And it's very important that the next generation reads it and knows about it and acts upon it.
Michael and Roberta, thank you so much. The next question comes from Perth, Australia. This is none other than the co-chair of HRNK's Board of Director, Gordon Flyke, who recently, just I guess a few months ago, Gordon became an Australian national. So, Gordon, we look forward to hearing from you. Please go ahead, sir.
Well, thank you, Greg, and congratulations.
Maybe everybody in this this Zoom link will become an Australian national. It'll raise the standards of intelligence and insight by our country.
Well,
Thank you for being on the program, Gordon.
Thank you. Well, I will confess there's never been a better time to be in the farthest city on the planet on land away from Washington, D.C., despite the wonderful 25 years I had there. Justice Kirby, thank you so much for doing this program, and thank you for your leadership. I have to say, just listening to you this morning, describe current events with such passion and clarity, it takes me back. Thank you. In the past, I think you may recall that you kindly came out and spoke here at the University of Western Australia. We were together at the Salzburg Global Seminar in Austria. And you referenced the fact that you are going around continually on universities making the case, as you've done so passionately this morning. I have a bit of a cheeky question, and that is, you held up that wonderful readable report. You suggested, I think in one of our last conversations, that what needed to happen is somebody needed to take and make an illustrated version, turn it into a manga or some type of comic book format. And that seemed a bit fanciful. However, I understand that during the recent speculation around the health of Kim Jong-un, the Japanese were proposing, or some of them did, a small manga around his younger sister, Kim Yo-jong. So I figure if Kim Yo-jong can get a manga, the Commission of Inquiry's special report should certainly get an illustrated version to continue the message to the broader masses. So any progress on that front?
Now, I'm going to make an admission now. When I was at school and I didn't have enough time to read all the books that were assigned for our English studies, my brothers told me that there are comic classics. And the comic classics were a sort of summary of these works of great literature, and that would help me to get the information quickly and efficiently. And that's what I did. And I got first-class honors in English. And therefore, I'm always been in favor of classic comics. And I think turning this report of the COI into a pictorial representation would be a good thing, because in fact we had a few images of the torture to which some of our witnesses were subjected. And I don't know if that is now visible on the screen, but that is in the report. There is some imagery, but we need to get this report over to those who are relevant. And unfortunately, the UN is very good in setting up secretariats and getting the work done in an efficient and accurate way, but selling the report and getting the news out to the relevant communities, and in this case, getting the news of this report into North Korea. That has not been done. And at the moment, North Korea is getting itself into great excitement just because a few balloons are taking a few pamphlets critical of their regime. And that's what this tantrum is all about. The tantrum of destroying the joint reunification building in Kaesong was because they cannot abide the fact that into their land is coming alternative viewpoints and different aspects and different ideas about the future of North Korea. And so anything that brings this message out I favor. But it won't happen from the United Nations. It doesn't have the resources. Its resources are being cut by the United States of America in a number of areas, including human rights and including the World Health Organization. So the UN doesn't have the resources, but the private sector should have the resources. The private sector in South Korea is very wealthy. And they should, out of love for their brothers and sisters in the North, they should have printed this and in a way that was attractive, that could go on sale at airports. There's no copyright problem. There's no, so long as they don't alter the substance of the text, it can be done. But nobody had the interest, nobody had the money. Well, we've got to do better than that. The people of North Korea deserve better. They deserve getting access, pictorial, textual, and digital, to this report.
Michael and Gordon, thank you so much. We're now going to Washington, D.C. to Mark Tokola, senior U.S. diplomat, scholar, great American, currently vice president of the Korea Economic Institute, KEI, in Washington, D.C., an institution tasked to educate the American public on the importance of U.S.-Korea relations, on the importance of the U.S.-South Korea alliance, friendship, and partnership. Mark, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Can I be heard now?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Wonderful event. Congratulations for putting this on. And Justice Kirby, it's wonderful to see and hear you again.
Thank you,
My
Bob.
question is kind of the same as Roberta Cohen's in terms of what do we do to do diplomacy with North Korea and also be able to raise human rights with them? I mean, are there modest steps we could ask them to undertake that would be reasonable to put into the course of a diplomatic discussion?
Well, this is the question that's been before the United Nations since the beginning of the COI, and indeed before with the Special Rapporteur. And there have been some steps that have been taken which have been in the right direction. For example, in the area of disability, where there was great prejudice, which is recounted in our report, the government in North Korea did permit the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights of disabled persons to come into their country, something which they always denied to the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and to the COI. And they have improved somewhat the treatment of disabled persons. Likewise, they have participated in the Universal Periodic Review, which every member state of the United Nations is subjected to. They have not agreed with all of the suggestions made directed at them, but they have agreed to some. To what extent there is follow-up is a question, because without on-the-ground people who can freely move about and ask questions, it's difficult to know whether the agreement is simply diplomatic or whether it's truthful and there has in fact been some improvement. But what can we do? Now, people say, well, if we say anything about human rights, they will not engage with us. Well, that may be so, but do you then stop talking about human rights? Essentially, that has been what has happened. I hope that the image of that tantrum-caused destruction of the building in Kaesong will be a wake-up call to the government and people of the Republic of Korea, that soft soap and trying to appease this angry and autocratic government in North Korea doesn't work. I mean, when has it ever worked? Did it work with that great man, the president of South Korea, Kim Dae-jung, a really great man whom I met in Australia when he came, just before he became the president. Great and brave he was, but his efforts, sincere and genuine, to introduce the sunshine policy, well, there wasn't a great payback for it. There wasn't a lot of action on the part of North Korea. They are experts in pretending and then not delivering. And even President Trump, who prides himself on getting to a deal and talked about the great bromance that he had with Kim Jong-un, what has he delivered? Nothing. There hasn't been really any substantive change in the posture of North Korea in the development of nuclear weapons. On the contrary, they're now talking about breaking their interruption to testing, going back to testing, and the reason that they blew up the building in Kaesong is because they said South Korea is just a lackey of the United States of America. We've come to the conclusion that they are not our friends, and therefore we will destroy this building and we will show our displeasure. So if anybody thought this was a high road to a more peaceful, human rights respecting world, well, I'm afraid they are misty-eyed dreamers. It doesn't work that way with North Korea. And what can we do? I think we've got to keep trying to improve the dialogue with North Korea. We've got to keep reaching out. We've got to keep offering to go there and to acknowledge anything which we've got wrong in our descriptions because of the inaccessibility of North Korea. We've got to make gestures of friendship. And there was a whole list of them in our report. They're not often referred to, but sister city friendship, visits by sporting teams, and other outreach of friendship. But the bottom line is we've got two very big problems that have to be dealt with for the safety of the world. One of them is the problem of human rights, and the other is the problem of peace and security. And unless we deal with each of them, we're not going to deal successfully with the other. And so whatever else we do, it cannot be to muzzle our faces and to remain silent. And that is not in the interests of the people of North Korea. And you've got to keep asking yourself, why did the world after 1945 discover and state crimes against humanity? Why did it do that? And what is our obligation under that? And it is not to turn our back. That is exactly the wrong approach. And I'm afraid we've got to get people to realize that and keep exhibiting friendship and giving humanitarian aid, something that the Special Rapporteur has been emphasizing, but at the same time insisting on peace and security and human rights. And the two are interconnected. If North Korea wasn't spending so much of its hard-earned and rare hard currency on nuclear developments, it would be able to feed its people. And the Special Rapporteur, in his report of February 2020, reveals that we are now having a revisit to the starvation that was such a feature of North Korea in 1995 and after. I think the best, possibly the best chapter of this report is the chapter on food and on starvation. The basic obligation of every government is to make sure they feed the people. And that is not happening in North Korea today. And that's a very serious humanitarian crisis, but it's a humanitarian crisis made by North Korea. It's made in Pyongyang.
Michael and Mark, thank you very much. Now we are going to Seoul, to Yonhap News. I have received a question via the chat room from Song Sang-hun of Yonhap News in Seoul. Michael, there is an issue about whether to allow North Korean defectors to continue sending anti-Pyongyang propaganda leaflets, which the North thinks is a hostile act, discrediting its leader. The South Korean government appears to want to curb the leafletting on the grounds that it could provoke tensions in the border regions. What is your opinion, given that North Korean escapees argue that leaflets are aimed at shining a light on the reality of the North?
I don't know what, if anything, the constitution of the Republic of Korea says about freedom of expression and expressing your views, including to your neighbors. And it may be that there are some answers there in the constitutional right of free expression of the people of South Korea. But the pamphlets, I mean, this is what was being used by the Allies over Germany in the latter days of the Second World War. It's very old technology. Pamphlets, dropping down pamphlets is really a resort to 1930, 1940 technology. And it's done because of the jamming and other interference with digital technology getting into North Korea. I think the effort should be to build inter-Korean communication that will allow much freer expression to get into North Korea from South Korea. But as to whether it is lawful under the Constitution of South Korea to stop it, as to whether it should be stopped, well, no doubt that has to be decided by those who are on the ground and who know what is important for the safety of North Korea, of South Korea and North Korea. I was asked yesterday, how can you explain this change in South Korea? And I mentioned in a Zoom meeting, which is going on at this time from Stanford University, that in the war, in the Second World War, there was a proposal that the Brisbane line should be drawn, and that with the move of the enemy down from Asia into the Australian continent, we would do best to draw a line and then defend the rest of Australia. And if that had happened, it was very controversial in Australia, but if it had happened, and if a line had been drawn, and if half of Australia had been lost, and if our relatives were incommunicado and unable to be approached, I'm sure we would be very, very anxious to terminate that. I remember President Park saying to me before her impeachment, the issue which is closest to my heart is reconciliation and restoring relations with North Korea. And I am absolutely convinced that that is the motivation of President Moon Jae-in. But I'm not sure that the best strategy is to punish those who speak the truth and try to speak the truth to power. If this is simply insulting material, that's one thing. But if it's based upon the best possible available data, such as the material in the report of the COI, then bringing that to the notice of the people of North Korea is not only not wrong, it is right. And it's only being done in this rather old-fashioned technology, because the modern technology of bringing it by radio, television, satellite imagery, and the internet is forbidden to the ordinary people of North Korea. And therefore they have to resort to these rather primitive means of trying to get the truth into North Korea. But the people of North Korea have rights. They have human rights, and they include the right to know more about the government that rules them, and about how out of line it is to the principles of universal human rights in Eleanor Roosevelt's Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Michael, thank you very much. We are going to go to Cambridge, Massachusetts next. We have a question from Professor Sandra Fahey. Sandra, I'm going to turn it over to you. Professor Sandra Fahey is at Harvard right now, and she's, as we all know, the author of Dying for Rights, a book about the situation of human rights in North Korea and efforts to address that situation and the crimes against humanity being perpetrated in that country. Sandra, please go ahead.
Hi, I hope you can hear me okay. Just give me a thumbs up if you can. Thank you so much. Justice Michael Kirby, it's such a pleasure to have this chance to speak with you directly. I just want to say I am so grateful for the work you did with the Commission of Inquiry and the continued work that you do on this cause. So I'm very grateful for that. My question is not really so interesting, and I feel like you've already kind of answered it before in terms of speaking about our duty of care to our fellow human beings north of the 38th parallel. But I would just like to hear your thoughts on the issue of, you know, many people, particularly in the United States, say that we should put the nuclear issue first and then the human rights issue. So I'd just like to hear what your thoughts are in relation to that. Thanks.
I don't think it's possible to divorce the two issues. That is what we are seeing at the moment. We are seeing the issues divorced, as if, well, we've got to deal with the nuclear danger because that is so perilous, and we'll just put the issue of human rights in the little bottom drawer. The problem with that strategy is that the very type of attitude that asserts a right of a government over its people to do such horrible things as are revealed in the report of the Commission of Inquiry indicates a certain arrogance. Not only is it tantrum driven, but it's arrogant to assert that you have the right to assign human beings to a particular level in society, the so-called Songbun system, that they are then assigned to that, and virtually nothing they can do can rescue them from it. And you just have to accept that and to assert the right to conduct public executions. The special rapporteur in his most recent report recounted of a person, a woman who had shot the son of a party leader in North Korea. And the consequence of that was that she was brought to a place and thousands of people were brought there, and she was then the subject of an execution squad which riddled her body with multiple shots. And the special rapporteur rightly repeated what we had said in the COI about public executions, the spattering of blood and bone on the school children who were brought there to see it and to get the message of fear. These are horrible crimes that are being perpetrated, and they just cannot be ignored, because the type of attitude that blows up the building in Kaesong or shoots people by public execution, to which thousands of people are brought, whether they want to or not, to see it. This is primitive, and it is not an acceptable way of behaving in human society in the 21st century. So I don't think you can divorce the two, and I don't think any agreement about nuclear weapons will be worth the paper it's written on if it isn't part of a general settlement that is in part a peace treaty, but in part a declaration of fundamental human rights that will be observed. How you get to that point is difficult, but you don't get to it by ignoring and pretending that there is no issue about human rights, because there is an issue and it's on the table. And if leaders don't mention it, then they're going to fool nobody, least of all the regime in North Korea. The regime in North Korea will be encouraged to think that if they act in a more and more petulant manner, then countries will fall silent about the terrible crimes that they are perpetrating. And that is not a good message, because the kind of state that does this is not the kind of state whose promises on nuclear weapons are going to be worth the paper they're written on.
Michael and Sandra, thank you very much. Michael, we discussed this yesterday. You kindly agreed to go a little bit into overtime if we have a lot of questions. So we do still have a lot of questions. I am going to go back to Seoul, South Korea. I have a question from Jong-un Lee. First, what do you think of the leader's sister, Kim Yo-jong's recent statements about North Korean defectors and their activities in South Korea? She called North Korean escapees, quote unquote, human scum. She's trying to press South Korea to ban flying leaflets in the DMZ, across the DMZ. What does this indicate? And this is truly the question. What does this indicate about the North Korean regime's current perception of human rights?
Well, for a time, Kim Jo-jong was put forward as a kind of very sweet, ladylike person. She turned up at the summit meetings, and she, in fact, even before them, she came to South Korea for the sports games, and she did appear to be a nice, polite, educated in Switzerland person who everyone could learn to love. But we're now seeing the other side of the Supreme Leader's sister. She is a member of the Kim family, and she said, because we don't trust South Korea, which is just a lackey of the United States, we are going to bring to bear a radical dismantlement. We're going to act, and we're going to act now. And the Supreme Leader has asked the defense to advise on what should be done, and then boom, down came the building in Kaesong. So it's by their deeds that you have to judge people, and I'm afraid somebody who, in fairness to her, has grown up in a life of privilege, in a life of a family which has such power in the land, the power of life and death, that has killed an uncle, Jian Song-tek, has killed a brother, Kim Jong-nam, and has done all of these other horrible things, then you have to judge her by what she is doing. And what she is doing is simply in line with privilege. People who are privileged and have great power and are not accountable. They're not accountable in even the imperfect ways that in democratic countries, they are rendered accountable. So I'm not all that impressed by the Supreme Leader's sister. And I just think she is part of a package of privilege, which by the Songbun system says this small group are the elite. They have all powers and rights. The middle group are not to have those rights. They are wavering classes, and the hostile classes at the bottom of the rung, well, they're the enemy, and if they put a foot out of line, they've got to end up in a detention camp. And people who have that power, until that power is removed from them, tend to use it. And that is, I think, what we're seeing by the actions of Kim Jo-jong.
Thank you, Michael. Next, I am going to go to Ruby Parker, who has a very interesting question about recent political developments in South Korea. Ruby, I hope you can ask the question directly. You have also texted me your question, but I hope you can do this directly. Please go ahead.
Professor, thank you. Justice Kirby, sir, thank you so much for sharing the time with us tonight. My question was, there are two North Korean assemblymen recently elected to the South Korean National Assembly, Tae Young-ho and Ji Sung-ho. I was wondering if you could comment on whether this is something like in the right, a step in the right direction towards uncovering and exposing human rights violations in North Korea?
Well, if there are a lot of things that if I were starting again, I would have done differently in the inquiry of the COI. One of them would have been to reach out to the opposition party at that time, which is now the party of government, the party of President Moon Jae-in. We did try to reach out, but unfortunately all our efforts drew a blank, and that, looking back, was a misfortune. And the other thing I would have done would have been to have had more contact with the so-called defector community, the escapees, the refugees, because not only do they have authentic and often relatively up-to-date knowledge, but they are quite numerous. They are 33,000. They are living in the midst of their fellow citizens of ROK, and it would have been a good thing if they had been engaged more closely than was possible. We did have some dialogue with them, but looking back, that was a resource we could have used more than we did. As it was, we had a lot of refugees come forward in the public hearings, and we saw them not as members of the refugee community, but as people who had actually suffered in North Korea, who were telling us of what they had gone through. I met Tae Young-ho at the IBA meeting, the International Bar Association meeting in Seoul last year. And of course, he was a very senior officer in the government of North Korea. He was the deputy ambassador of North Korea to the court of St. James, the United Kingdom. And he gave a very intelligent speech, balanced and informative. And because he's actually from the elite, he's got a lot of insights that will, if listened to, be very useful to the legislature in South Korea. One thing I did learn was that in South Korea, politics is played very hard. It's a very hard game. and enmity is not uncommon, and getting the dialogue that is necessary and useful in a democracy doesn't always happen. And I think it would be a good thing if the knowledge of Tae Jong-ho and Ji Seong-ho were used to the advantage of their fellow citizens in South Korea. The community of the so-called defectors often complain that they suffer discrimination and disadvantage in South Korea. In fact, they can be a bridge and a source of knowledge, including knowledge of good things in North Korea. No country is without some good things. In the arts and culture, there may well be things that North Korea can teach South Korea. But if you don't give them positions of responsibility and give them a voice, then you will never get the benefit of their co-citizenship. And that, I hope, is what's going to happen now with these two very prominent defectors who are now in public office in the legislature of South Korea.
Thank you, Michael. Gina Standard has been very patiently waiting to have her question answered. It's a very interesting question about pressure being currently applied to North Korean human rights organizations and North Korean human rights activists. Gina, please go ahead. Gina? Well, let me then go ahead and ask the question.
Oh, sorry here. I
Go ahead.
unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so my question was, what are your, well, you actually answered it a little bit already, but what are your thoughts on the South Korean government currently pressing the charges against activists loading the anti-regime leaflets over the border? And you mentioned this, but is this a warranted response given that the ROK's commitment, ROK committed to ending the balloon launches during the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit?
Yes, well, South Korea is a functioning democracy. It has courts. The courts have proved themselves to be pretty strong. Presidents have been removed from office by impeachment, and other presidents have been rendered answerable to criminal charges, and citizens have rights, and there will be people who can take their complaints to courts, and that will be determined by the independent judiciary. And I mustn't step into what will happen in that respect, because that will be a matter for the independent courts in South Korea. One matter which is before the South Korean courts under the Constitution is a challenge to the laws on homosexuality, which is a matter that is of great interest to me. And that is an indication that in every country there are human rights questions. But at least in South Korea, there are independent courts which have shown by the decisions they've made in the past that they will apply faithfully, accurately, and justly the Constitution. At least in recent years, that has been shown. And I hope that some of these issues that are now being raised in challenge to the steps that have been taken by the South Korean government, in the hope that it would lead on to improvement in the very dangerous situation concerning nuclear developments in North Korea, that some of those steps will lead to revision by President Moon Jae-in. After all, he comes from a background where he has been fighting for perspectives of human rights himself in the courts. and he knows how dear that was to the heart of Kim Dae-jung. So what I'm hopeful of is that when he saw the explosion and destruction, wanton, useless, tantrum-driven destruction of the of the building in Kaesong for reunification dialogue between the two Koreas, that he may come to a conclusion that the old strategy has to be reconsidered, because the old strategy was adopted in the hope that it would result in the end to the actions of Kim Jong-un, but it hasn't. And therefore, I hope that that will lead to a change. But if it doesn't, then what are the answers in a democratic society? Those answers are for political dialogue, agitation, and the use of the free press, and access to the courts and challenges in the courts where citizens assert their fundamental human rights. And at least in South Korea, you're not going to be lined up against a wall and shot, which is what happens in North Korea if you stand up against the government, or you're not going to be put into a detention camp, not only yourself for your hide in raising these issues, but your parents and children are all going to be put in with you. This is what our report found in respect of the detention camps. You know, Marzuki Darusman said, we've got to get one achievement. And he said, the achievement we've got to aim at is a closure of the political camps. And we endeavored to highlight that issue. We demonstrated it not only by the testimony of the witnesses, but by satellite imagery, which confirmed exactly the testimony of the witnesses. But we didn't get any resolution of that issue. On the contrary, North Korea does not admit that it has these detention camps. And therefore I said, let us come in. And if you can show us the places, we can identify exactly where we want to go. And if you won't let us come in, let somebody who you nominate, the Red Cross or some other body that will be universally trusted, let them go in and inspect and report. And if you show that we have made a mistake, we will be the first to admit it, and I will admit it and apologize. But they didn't let us come in. They didn't let the Red Cross come and look at their what the satellite images showed was confirmation of these camps, and those camps still remain with the public execution system as a warning to the people of North Korea. Do not cross the line. You do not have a right to change your government. You do not have a right to change your society. You have a songbun. You are classified as a person who may be an enemy of the state, and if you are then caught, you will be put into a detention camp. And this is a crime against humanity, and we should not accept that conduct, and we should protest against it. And the people of South Korea, knowing that these are their brothers, sisters, aunts, grandparents, should protest and continue to protest. That's what Mahatma Gandhi taught us. We must be the change we want to see in our world. And that's the challenge which the report of the Commission of Inquiry introduced. In my office here in Sydney, Australia, I have a little sign on the floor so I can see it every day when I come into my office. And I hope it can be seen on the image here. It's a statement made by Winston Churchill, who stood up against the Nazi oppressors, never never, never give up. Never give up, never give up. And that, I think, is the lesson for human rights guardians. Never give up against oppression and departures from universal human rights.
That is so inspiring, Michael. I know we're already over time. I have a lot of questions from our own team, actually. Amanda Mortwadow, HRNK human rights attorney, some of our wonderful interns, Emily Gibson, Teresa Nguyen, Steve Kim. We're going to bundle these together and send you an email. We have our private channel of communication. They would so highly appreciate it if they heard from you. I'll do this in the coming days. That said, before we conclude, there are two questions I must absolutely take. One of them comes from a North Korean escapee from G Park, who says, Justice Kirby, the COI report mentions North Korean refugees in China. However, nowadays, many countries, the United Nations, non-governmental organizations, do not say much about North Korean refugees. People all around the world do not really remember the slow motion North Korean refugee crisis. How can we help the refugees? How can we shed light on the forcible repatriation issue? So this is the first question. I'm going to take the final question, which is going to the Asahi Shimbun in Japan. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for taking my question. Actually, I'm not in Japan now. I'm a correspondent for Asahi newspaper, but I'm living in Europe and
Terrific.
covering. Thank you. I'm covering the.
You're in Vienna, right?
Vienna, yes, yes.
Oh, terrific. Yes, yes. Apologies.
It's 2:16 now.
Yes. Thank you.
I'm covering the ongoing Human Rights Council now, and this Friday or Monday, another resolution will be adopted at the HRC. And Japan was one of the two main sponsors of this resolution, but not anymore now. About this policy change, they said they are giving the priority to the dialogue with North Korea, especially on the issue of abducted Japanese nationals. But so far, nothing happened in diplomacy. And sadly, abductee Megumi Yokota's father has died very recently. So my question is, what would you think is the most effective way to move things forward to resolve this abduction issue and to have more chance getting abductees back? Thank you.
Earlier in this, I'll deal with the second question first. Earlier in this dialogue, I specifically mentioned the abduction issue and the primitive nature of the conduct of North Korea in seizing citizens of Japan and taking them to North Korea for completely illegitimate and often ill-defined purposes. And that remained a very important issue in the report of the Commission, because it's such an affront and such a shocking act, not only from the point of view of fundamental universal human rights, but also from the point of view of the respect by one country for the fundamental rights of others. Is there a problem with the sound, Greg?
No problem, Michael.
Right, okay, you're just coming very close to me and I get nervous when that happens on I thought this might be Big Brother coming close to me.
I'm typing up a message, Michael, no worries.
As to the strategy and program of Japan in relation to its abductions, then no doubt they have to consider what is going to advance the abductions. There is something of a controversy as to how many Japanese nationals were abducted. According to some lists, it's a very relatively small number. The Commission of Inquiry thought it was more numerous, and that there were more abductees, and including abductees from other countries such as Thailand, and even I think from Romania and from countries in Europe. I hope that Japan, as a leading country in our world, a country of great importance, of wealth, and of many lessons learned from the past, will not turn away from the lessons which the COI report brings for the problem of human rights. It is not just a problem for the Japanese community. It's not just a problem for the family of the abductees in Japan. It's a problem for the region and a problem for the world. And it really is important that Japan should remain committed to the human rights of the people of North Korea, because Japan itself has borne witness to the missiles and the other activity that North Korea engages in, including abduction, which is dangerous to Japan. But as a good citizen of the world, Japan must not become less involved in the issues of North Korean human rights. I pay my respects to Mr. Tanaka, the father of Yagumi, who I met on a number of occasions on visits to Japan. He has died in the last week, but he can be sure that he made a very big impact, as did his wife, on the Commission of Inquiry, and their heartrending story of waiting for their daughter to return from badminton class, and she never returned. That is something which was typical of the wrongdoing of the officials in North Korea, and the report of the Commission of Inquiry will be a memorial to him and to his family and to the people of Japan, and they must, on this matter, never, never, never give up, never give up. As to the question, the earlier question concerning refugees and why the world is turning away from that, it probably has to be said that events that have happened since the report of the COI have led to some deep concerns in many countries, including in my own country, Australia, but particularly in countries in Europe, about the flood of refugees that have been coming from countries which are subject to human rights wrongdoing, such as the refugees from Syria and Iraq and other countries of the Middle East. That has led to a growing intolerance of refugees, and that has led to something of a retreat from the respect and protection of those who seek refuge from out of North Korea. But the Refugees Convention is clear, and it remains as an obligation for the whole of humanity. You cannot send a person back to the country from which they have escaped in order to require that country to give them protection, because the very escape has proved that they can't be relied upon to give protection. And therefore, refoulement, which is the French word for rendering the person back to the country of oppression, is forbidden by international law. And it's important that the Human Rights Council and the other organs of the United Nations should continue to speak up for this. Again, this is a lesson we learned from the Second World War. The Refugees Convention is an outgrowth, is a product, a result of the suffering of so many people in the Second World War. And that's why the Charter of the United Nations was adopted. That's why the Charter, in its opening paragraphs, refers to the three objectives of the United Nations: justice and economic equity, peace and security, and universal human rights. And it's the universal human rights that has to be protected, because without them, the other two objectives will not be secured. And that's why we have to keep pressing and supporting the High Commissioner for Refugees and the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Human Rights Council, not walking out of the Human Rights Council, but remaining in the Human Rights Council, giving leadership, giving example, and giving the message that this is what the UN is all about. That is the message that Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt sought to teach the world back in 1945. And the lesson remains relevant. And it remains relevant for refugees, but it remains relevant for the people of North Korea. And the report of the COI will remain before the international community until each and every one of the recommendations that was made are fulfilled in the future of North Korea. The people of North Korea don't know we are having this discussion about them today, but we have enough love for people who are suffering to work to alleviate their suffering, and one day they will know, and they will know that in a dark time we were not silent. We shone the light, and we will never, never, never give up.
Michael, you provide such great inspiration to all of us, going way beyond the world of North Korean human rights defenders. Going back to the earlier question about Japanese abductees, you have been a terrific friend of Korean people living in the South and in the North. You have been a terrific friend of the people of Japan. We all remember that 3 years ago, you were invested with the insignia of the Order of the Rising Sun, Gold and Silver Star in Tokyo, with an audience with His Majesty, the Emperor of Japan. I think that we should really put you in charge of mending relations between our two great friends, allies, and partners. Again, I have a bundle of HRNK questions. They absolutely love you. They look up to you. You're such a great inspiration. We will be in touch. Thank you for everything. Let me remind participants who have stayed with us over time, apologies to you, Michael, and to everybody else, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Friday this week, 11 a.m. Eastern, we will be hearing from Cindy Warmbier, mother of Otto Warmbier, the bright, handsome, terrific American young man, University of Virginia student who was arrested and detained on trumped-up charges in North Korea, put into a coma by the North Korean authorities, returned to the USA. He passed away 3 years ago, 1 week after he was returned to his native state of Ohio. So please join us if you can on Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern. Michael, this has been an extraordinary treat, an honor and privilege. Thank you for everything that you have done for so many years, for so many decades. This North Korean human rights movement, all of us are deeply grateful to you. We look forward to staying in touch. Thank you, sir, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Greg.